Jim is going to be here momentarily.
This was a canceled and then the not canceled meeting.
I don't know what happened. There was a flurry of things, and
There was
I'm
indeed.
not quite sure. I think we all had our signals straight, I guess. So.
Car is here. There he is.
Morning.
He's been at Koopa having coffee.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we might as well do that.
I was waiting for you.
And I guess, yes. Good luck with that one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There you go.
Hi.
Thanks.
Sure.
Well, shall we go ahead and get started? At this time, I'd like to convene the Council Subcommittee on Local Transportation Funding for May 13th, 2016. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Niss.
Here.
Vice Mayor Sharp.
Here.
Or President.
Okay. So we'll have two opportunities for the public to speak, and we're treating this as a fairly informal meeting, so we may have additional dialogue from any other stakeholders that are here today. But before we get started, we have an opportunity for members of the public to speak on items that are not on the agenda, and I don't have any speaker cards on that. So our one and only item today is discussion and possible direction to staff on outreach in advance of a second poll on a possible local tax measure. So, Jim, did you want to kick anything off, or how shall we?
Others, but yeah, if that's okay, Mr. Mayor, you haven't said anything before I got here.
No, we just
Okay.
started.
Other than where the heck's Jim?
Working on the state
also
for fire
said we're-
contract.
Just kidding, just kidding, just kidding.
So, first of all, I'd almost sort of say turn you to the last page first, and we can talk about this in more detail. But this was really this meeting is in response to the council's directive about the original poll indicating some potential for a measure that could be placed on the ballot this year. We identified the fact that you have a short time frame, that basically actually about 7 weeks now, between now and when you go on break to make a final decision about language that you would want to place on the November ballot. So what we've really done is try to walk backwards. We can go into some more detail to identify what is initial outreach that we would need to do, since we haven't really done any formal outreach, acknowledging that would still be kind of truncated or short. And then that would serve two goals. One would be to establish this outreach effort, and then it would also then help inform the subsequent poll, the final poll that you were asking us to look at doing before you would make a decision about where you would go forward. So you guys would remember TBWB, who did the same kind of work for us in the on the ballot measure that we did on the TOT tax. So we've got the same folks, FM3 Dave Metz, and TBWB with Charles here. And so just so you do know, I want to let you know that
Is that Carbatola?
Pardon me?
No, Terrace Barnes and Walters.
Oh, thank you.
I worked for Larry once upon a time, but not anymore.
But this is Terrence. That's the other group.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so I do want to let you know that we engaged Dave Metz in the first round. Should be just a little bit under $25,000. We did a short kind of contract with with Charles's folks, again, for something in that range, and if we did a subsequent polling, it would be another one of those, and so I would be, council's contingency has more than sufficient money, but I do want to let you know there's some costs associated with this, so we need to be following up with that. And with that, I would just, Claudia, is there anything more that you feel we need to say? I mean, I think the main guy here is Charles.
No, I think we'll turn it over to Charles to go through his outreach.
Could I do one follow-up, Pat?
Sure.
So what we're talking about is about 25 for the first poll, 25 for another poll if it gets, if that's the decision.
Right.
And what's in the middle of the Terrence and Barn and so forth? What does that cost?
Same price range.
Another
basically.
25
Yeah.
though? So we're
Yeah.
talking 75 total.
Right.
Thanks.
To get ready for prime time. I will say one thing here is that the council discussion, you guys probably remember better than we do, was a little wide-ranging about what we would maybe consider and look at here in the short time frame. In other words, we brought back the poll results relating to a business tax, a tax on business for transportation. And as I recall, there were different council member comments about, did we look at other tax approaches? We mentioned that the committee discussed sales tax, but we decided not to poll on that. There was some conversation about parcel tax and things like that. And then there were even conversations about what are potential uses that could be applied to a tax. And I would just say that we have not focused on trying to bring you a concept that would allow for all of those things to happen, but that may need to be part of your discussion here, just partly because of the constrained time frame. If our focus is a November 2016 ballot measure, if it's not, if there's a larger question about what are the city's needs, what are the tax approaches, all of those things, then it's a whole different, it's a whole different time frame, and we could support a broader discussion. But that was our thinking.
Do you have a copy of the council motion, just so I know that we follow the motion?
Yeah, that would be good. Can you help us with that, Dave? And I don't know if it's worth reviewing the report we gave you. My summary would just be, if you recall, that the conclusion, I think, from FM3 was that a special tax, particularly with any opposition, would be pretty dicey as the potential to be able to garnish the 2/3 vote. But there was, we had strong polling on what ultimately could be a general tax, and while there were some weaker poll results, they seemed to do more with a lack of clarity or confusion, or complicatedness on these different tiers and things like that. So I think there was a sense that you could successfully take something forward to the voters, but one of the purposes for the outreach is to begin to also initially test what support and or opposition is out there outside of the polling process.
So I can read it to you and I'll get it on.
Okay, thanks.
Mayor Burt moved, seconded by Councilmember Holman, to refer this to the Local Transportation Funding Committee to work with staff and the pollster to develop a second set of questions and conduct outreach with stakeholders.
So then, this meeting and agenda isn't specifically on the second set of questions, it's agendized as about the outreach.
Right, and maybe Charles could help you with that. We didn't necessarily assume that the council couldn't get into that. It definitely seemed that you would not be finalizing any questions until you had done some of this outreach.
Right. I would agree that the outreach is also around the refined
Right.
The outreach helps to inform the second poll, because
Yeah.
inevitably issues will come up in that process that you'll want to test among the broader
Well,
voters.
it both informs a second poll, but our input on what might be in the second poll would inform what we discuss in the outreach.
That's right.
So that's kind of
Right.
today's overlap of discussing where we're headed in the second poll, because that refines.
I would
what we're
agree. I
outreach
do
on.
not think that the way we title this precludes discussion of questions. It does preclude finalizing questions and direction on those being the questions that we would use for the poll. They don't mean that, clearly you would want to say you need to go out and see how people feel about, a business tax described as a business tax on transportation or whatever versus XYZ and whatever questions. You may want to talk more deeply about the question that the mayor and some of the others of you may be raised about, that we had only one concept polling question in the first poll is the relationship, the reference to the VTA transportation tax. So part of your outreach may want to be sure that you're getting clarity on how those two
Right.
are
I
perceived.
would say that the first poll didn't give us enough clarity on a real critical question, which is, as Jim was saying, we saw 74% support for the VTA tax, but we don't really know whether a business license tax on the same ballot would pull that down significantly.
So could I add one thing to that? VTA, and I'm sure you both know this, is going to take up the issue of the tax at the very beginning of June, which is unusual, giving it time to come back in August if necessary. But they think that they're ready to vote on it now and solidify the going forward. So I think we need to take that into consideration when we do the next poll, because they may have already voted, but we don't know yet.
Well, I think we're assuming that that's going forward, and that's
I think it's
taking
going
it-
forward. It's whether it goes forward in June or whether they wait till August to vote on it. But right now it's scheduled for June 2nd.
Yeah, but for purposes of our second poll, I'm not quite sure how the date at which they adopt it would change it. We're still assuming it's going forward.
Yes, but I don't think we need to poll for it again, because we did a good poll for it the last time.
What we
Unless
didn't-
you're thinking it needs to be in there as something to push back against.
No, what we didn't poll for last time was how much if we had a measure for a business license tax. Right.
Whether
How
or
much
not
that would
would
pull
go.
it down.
But this time we may know for sure that that's going through. We didn't know the last time.
Okay.
There may still be a perception thing though, because, with Palo Alto, so even if the VTA is going on through, we still need to make the case of why, or poll for why, Palo Alto should be supportive of a local tax measure. They might just think that the VTA tax measure is solving all of that.
Right. I would agree that our polling didn't really make the strong case as to the why, and in fact, it did give us some feedback on what resonated the most, and then in the second poll, we may very well refine that message on what are the benefits based upon
Right.
priorities of the electorate, which might not be identical to what we had thought we would emphasize or even allocate for without hearing that feedback.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see, there was, we have several aspects to this. Who we want to engage with as in the outreach, what we want to ask them, and how it's going to inform what we're going to
So
do going forward.
I also like to ask, both in the engagement and in the polling, what kind of projects we should do for transportation. We can get some clarity on. First of all, I think the first question is: does it matter if we just say we want to do transportation? Do we have to have defined projects, or can we go to the voters and say this will just be used for transportation, and we give no more information than that?
You can't be that general, I don't
Yeah,
think.
no, you've
Yeah.
got to,
And
even my husband asked, said,
Well,
what are
everyone
you going
asked,
to do
that's
with
what I
that?
mean.
But I think
Yeah.
there's something in between the two alternatives that you just posited. One is general transportation, and the other is projects. And the in-between is categories.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
But I think we need to poll.
Just specificity matters in this.
Well, that's my belief, is that specificity matters, but how specific do you need to be is what I'm
Right.
trying to tease out of this.
Right.
Can
So-
I just say something
Sure.
to clarify? So, I know you guys know this. We will ultimately need to keep in mind, both in the outreach and then in the second poll, these line of questions we will we'll need to keep in mind the fact that the ballot question itself will be limited to whatever it is, 75 words.
Yep.
And so then it's the associated things that we do that most likely will incorporate these details.
Well, we're going to have an advisory ballot measure possibly. I mean, that's...
Well, that's one thing you want to discuss. Dave Metz was pretty negative, I think, about an advisory measure, a separate measure being
The
effective.
alternative is an ordinance or resolution, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what Molly had, Dave had recommended against advisory measure, but not necessarily opposed to ordinance or resolution that would accompany it.
And Dave and Molly had said that you can put language in the measure, that certainly speaks to transportation. It just doesn't necessarily, it's not as binding as it would be if it were a special tax.
Doesn't create a legal earmark. Yeah.
Can I suggest too that, in the budget this year, we have a number of transportation and parking measures that are expenses to the general fund that amount to millions of dollars at the public's expense. So I don't know if we want to specifically reference those, but I think, it is a fair share carrying cost, blah, blah, blah kind of
It's an
matter.
interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that I think could be argued either way. One is the one that you're saying is that should this be general fund expenditures to have the parking and traffic mitigation that we're saying is principally the result of commute traffic, not exclusively. On the other hand, it could be argued the other way that since we already have them in the budget, why do we need a new tax to do it? So I understand your point. I'm just saying that we'll need to anticipate how we would frame those kinds of impacts. So out of the who or the what, let's just so we start moving forward, why don't we talk first about who we'd want to include in the outreach, and then go into the probably a little more complex discussion around what we want to be asking.
Sure.
We have the second page of the handout has a list. One of the things that struck me immediately is the outreach is the list. Those listed here are all from the business community, none from the rest of the community. And so we want to first ask ourselves, since there are people in the business community who reside here as well, they don't vote, although they could be either important supporters or opposition, but they're not the voters per se. So I would think that we want to have both groups that we're doing outreach to.
Sure. Maybe it's helpful if I provide a little framing for this based on the thinking that went into this. And I should preface this by saying that we've only been on board since the beginning of this week. So there's been a lot of activity to put this together. But
we expect a completed presentation, of course.
Just wanted to manage expectations a little bit here.
Thank
you. We have about 7 weeks available to us, and if we're trying to target the June 27th meeting for formal council action on this issue, it's important to keep in mind that the deadline to qualify a measure for the November ballot is August 12th. That's when the county needs us to report on any issues we actually want to put on the ballot, but I understand that July is going to be a difficult month to move this process forward. So, we were tasked with thinking, how do we make best use of that 7-week time frame? And certainly as we approached the infrastructure measure a couple of years ago, we had a much more comprehensive outreach process, but we also had many months to complete that process, right? So we've tried to boil this down to who we think, who are those absolutely essential folks that we need to make sure we're hearing from. So we tried to look at, well, who are the obvious folks that have the most skin in the game given the nature of the issue. So obviously the Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Association, we looked at the TMA also as a group that's already has a connection to this issue, and then the largest employers, given that as I understand it, the structure you're looking at is based on an employee count, right? So these would be the folks most directly impacted. I'm sure there are other groups that we could potentially conduct outreach to. Happy to add those to the list as long as it's reasonably feasible that we can get through those names in the timeline available to us. And if you look at the timeline that I've developed here, I've basically looked at using next week to refine our message, prepare the materials that we would need to walk into a room with to conduct these outreach meetings, and then the following week begin the outreach, but really try to have that wrapped up by June 17th, right? So it's a pretty short turnaround time because we need time to synthesize the results of that feedback, communicate that to Dave Metz, so again we can make sure that we're capturing what we're learning from our outreach process and building that into the poll, give him time to develop that survey questionnaire and be in the field the week of June 17th through 24th, which is really the latest that he can poll and reasonably be expected to bring back the results of that survey in time for you all to make a decision on June 27th. So those are kind of the difficult parameters we're trying to work within. So with that, I think it would be helpful to get feedback both on any additions or subtractions to the outreach target list, and then I've also taken a stab at trying to create a narrative, right? I think we need to have our talking points in order as we sit down to conduct these outreach meetings and make sure that we're all speaking in a consistent manner. So based on the fairly limited information I have at this point, I've tried to articulate what the problem is, the proposed solution that the council is grappling with at this point, articulate what we already know about community input in the form of the polling that you've done, and there was one theme that really seemed to resonate in that poll, which is that this idea of fairness, that it's only fair that businesses pay to fund transportation and parking improvements since businesses contribute to the city's traffic and parking problems. I think it's important that that be part of the framing of this issue because that's a theme that the voters felt was a high priority. And then I've listed some key questions that I would suggest we use as sort of the basis of our outreach, try to collect input, and then bring the results of that back to you. So any input on the narrative here and any more specificity we could add to this based on the council's thinking, I think would be helpful.
On the problem statement, at a high level, I would say that there's another dimension to it that I think is really important, and in particular to the business outreach side. I don't think that we'll get good support from the business community by telling them they owe this to us because they're having negative impacts on residents' quality of life. I think the message that matters to them the most, I mean, I'm not saying they're indifferent to that, but that's not going to be central to their concerns. The message that matters the most is what, for instance, Greg and I heard from the Stanford Research Park, TMA, and the major employers in the research park, who said that congestion is today probably the biggest threat to their ability to recruit and retain employees, and that it is really threatening their existence in the research park, and that basically employees who don't necessarily live in Palo Alto or adjacent, maybe when they went first were employed there, the same thing as city employees, same kind of thing. They bought into a half-hour commute each way, and now it's an hour commute each way, and it's a different calculus as to whether it's worth it to continue to work for that company. And the same thing goes now when they're recruiting for new employees, and they tell them, well, we'll pay you well to work for this great company, but it's now an hour commute each way, and they just have a different set of decisions, and that's really an existential threat to those businesses, and they're now perceiving it that way. I suspect that we'll see a greater sense of enlightened self-interest from larger companies than smaller companies. The smaller companies just tend to be more visceral and not stepping back and thinking about big picture. It still applies to them, but I just expect that their thoughtfulness on this will be different from the larger companies.
Could I add something? But it's on the proposed solution, and I think that's a good comment, because what the feedback was from the research park, and also we spent an evening listening to their TDM as well. But looking at the proposed solution, I think that what is puzzling to people is what a business license tax is, because in different cities it is listed differently. I don't recall what San Jose is going to call theirs, but they have something specific that they're using. And while we say we have a registry at $50 and so forth, that's very different from looking at the business license tax, which is what you're saying. But I think we need to be cautious when we talk about what kind of tax it is. I think in our polling we use the word head tax, which is, there might be a more precise way to put that, or even more attractive way. There's something about a head tax that
More
sounds
descriptive.
Yeah, it sounds kind of.
Well, the word head tax is not good.
Pardon?
The term head tax is not good.
It just is.
We can call it poll tax.
It sort of harkens back.
People from Poland.
So I don't have a better suggestion for that,
Okay.
because I do think that's a fair way to go about doing this, is counting the number of people and making some determination at 0 to 10, 10 to 50, and so forth. But I think we could put that in a different light
Okay.
than the so-called head tax.
Can I add to this too? That's like the way this is couched, and thank you for, because it's always good to have something to focus on, even if we're taking pot shots at it. It's like it gets us focused, right?
It's a starting place.
So thank you for doing that.
We call that staff.
So the way it's written currently, and Pat kind of his comments were basically, I think, recognizing this. The way it's couched right now, it sort of looks like an us versus them, as opposed to us all being part of a larger community that we all have our impacts and our effects on the local community. So we benefit from our residential community and what they all bring and pay taxes, and we benefit also from having larger businesses here too. But I don't think we ought to be looking at trying to pit one against the other,
Okay.
Which this sort of reads to me like.
Okay. And Karen's comment makes me even think more strongly about what I was going toward, which is I was saying, well, we should also frame it around the interest of business. If we're having an outreach to business, I think that's should be almost exclusively what we frame it
Instead
around.
of,
Yeah.
Because the question is, can we make a case that it's in their interest?
Yeah, just to tag a little bit onto that, it's like that, that having solutions, traffic and parking solutions, are currently threats to employers large and small, public and private. It's a threat to everyone.
I think this is the heart of the matter. That I think one that the poll, the strong poll that says that it's fair for businesses to contribute towards solutions is an important thing to remember, because there would be a sense that they are contributing to the problem. And I think business would say they recognize that. Mm-hmm. So the fairness question though also gets inverted on their behalf to say, well, is it fair for us to pay for this? And I would guess, as the mayor said, that the larger businesses is probably pretty much, that's almost a slam dunk. The smaller you are, it maybe gets more complicated. And so one of the things we want to be sure we look at is also even on the last business license tax, what were the groups and what were the messages that were problematic for what it was that what we did. Mm-hmm. But I think the key thing will ultimately be for everybody, and this gets to the self-interest, and we don't have anywhere near enough on here yet, is do the proposed solutions help the problem? Mm-hmm. If businesses feel that they really do, then it's going to be much easier to do that. And I think even the public as a whole, even if people may say they would want to do it, they'll want to be able, I'm not saying it, but just like the things we have here, right now we have 4 things that they would say: provide safe routes to school, upgrade traffic signals, expand shuttle service, innovative TDM, would that be enough where people say, we realize there's a problem, we realize we should pay if we're business, or business should pay? And they say, that's great, now what happens, and will this make any difference to the congestion problem? And that's where I think we really need to be sure we start to hear from the community what needs to be done in that regard. Because if we can't articulate that, I think we're going to have challenges.
Great.
So I have some issues with this. I mean, I think, first of all, when we did the infrastructure ballot measure, we talked a lot about safe routes to schools, or a bicycle and pedestrian plan. The first thing you have on here is provide safe routes to schools. I'd say we just passed, we're spending $20 million, we're doing that right now. Really? You're going to get more money and that's what you're going to use it for? You know, it says safe routes to school for students. I thought you were already doing that. I think that's one thing we have to at least acknowledge and decide how we're going to handle that. What I thought we were going to do with this money a little bit is fund our TMA. Right? And if we're going to fund our TMA, how do we sell that to the public and say that's what's really important? And then I'm a little concerned in that if we're going to tax the largest employees in Palo Alto, which is Stanford, Lucille Packard, VMware, SAP, they're all in the business park. And so we have to fund the downtown TMA. But the business park has their own TMA, and they're also spending a lot of money already, as we figured out. So they're going to come to say to us, wait a minute, you're taxing us to do this, but you're already paying. We're already providing bus passes to everyone. Stanford's already providing GO passes, I believe, both to the university and to the medical center hospital. So I just think we need to think about how we're going to handle those issues, and what are we really trying to accomplish here? You know, what are we going to use the money for, and why does that help congestion? Why does that help business? Why should they sign up for it? So I just wanted to throw that out there.
So let me touch on a couple things. Let me hit yours second, because I did have another thought on kind of the high-level framing, which is that there is a way in which what we normally think of as the residential quality of life is important to the business community, and it's not. And it's, if we define this more as quality of life in Palo Alto, a great deal of the attraction of Palo Alto to businesses, whether they be retailers or office, is the environment of the community. And a degradation of that environment affects business vitality. So there are a number of reasons why we have strongest, the University Avenue is amongst the strongest sales per square foot of anywhere, and that Palo Alto in general has those attributes. You think about the Stanford Shopping Center, and if you can't get there, how vital is the Stanford Shopping Center if shoppers can't get there easily enough? So I think now that I think about it, there is a way that we would frame the same thing that matters to residents actually as a quality of life issue matters to, or quality of the community, it matters to the business community. And then Greg's issue is important. First, my notion wasn't that all dollars would go to funding TMA, but that would be one of the primary purposes. So for instance, if we're having expanded shuttle, the TMA isn't going to manage our shuttle system. Mm-hmm. So I think major dollars, but certainly a good portion of the dollars would go to funding TMA, and we shouldn't think that the downtown, we take tax dollars from the employers, and then we only channel those dollars to the downtown TMA, but not the Stanford Research Park TMA, or what is effectively Stanford Hospitals, a huge employer, has their own TMA. They don't call it a TMA, but they have their own TDM program, and they have transit passes and all that. So one of the questions is, out of a fairness, do some portion of these dollars go back to those entities, even though, say, the Research Park TMA may not be in so much need of those dollars, but out of an equity standpoint, we need to treat each of those who are putting money into TDM measures through their TMAs equivalently.
So I think that's a really good point, but what really struck and resonated with me was your speech at the end of the meeting, Pat, which is where you said, we can't wait 2 years.
Right.
But that means that we need results. I mean, there's no point in passing this and then spreading the money out because we need to spread it out if we're not going to accomplish anything with it. And I guess I still think we need, as a group, need to decide, okay, how much money are we going to raise? What is this going to look like? And what are we going to do with it?
So that's you're right, that's the final dimension. I don't know how far we can go in developing a kind of a refined plan for those uses, especially before we do an outreach.
No, I understand.
I'm guessing we can, even today, put a little more meat on the bone. In the outreach, that would be part of the feedback loop too.
Right.
We can hear what the stakeholders think would be of value. Then we'd have, by the time we put it on the ballot, we'd have a little better sense. And between then and when voters vote, hopefully we'd be able to flush it out a little more. So it's probably that kind of iterative process, realistically, given our time,
No, I
if we
think
went
that's a good
forward.
point.
Yeah.
So one other aspect of this, though, is that we really need to hear from business before we start getting into exactly what the questions could be or what even the outreach is. We have very different kinds of businesses in this community. We have the small businesses.
That is the outreach. That's the hearing from business. That is the outreach.
But if we're doing the outreach and asking questions of business, is that what you're thinking of as the outreach?
It's both, yeah.
Because I would think of them working somewhat with us before you actually do the outreach about the questions.
No, it would be, the outreach needs to include.
Your outreach, so before you think of refining what questions you're going to think of, you're going to work with business, correct?
Well,
No.
Maybe I'm not seeing this.
I think what we want to do is, as best we can, capture the city's thinking to date on this issue, right? So that we can walk in with a summary of, here's the concept, and then have some questions that help elicit, the various perspectives that the, diversity of the business community will have on this issue. And there very well may be outreach targets beyond the business community that we want to hear from as well. I don't think we have the luxury of time to sort of sample the opinions of a small group of the business community and then broaden out our outreach. I think we just need to sort of get into
And
it.
that wouldn't be what I had meant.
Okay.
What I think, though, is because I know we have Judy Kleinberg here today,
Yeah.
and a number of people have asked me questions about this and said, exactly what are you going to do with the tax? I simply don't want us to get too far afield from having that discussion with those who are really going to be affected.
Sure.
So,
Karen?
yeah, so a couple of things about the outreach and then some specificity. So there's a reason that VTA, when they're doing their polling, doing their outreach, that's a reason they put things in their questions about potholes. It's something specific that people can identify with and understand, like, yeah, if I don't have potholes that I have to encounter on my drive to work, then I can support that. So there has to be some level of specificity that people can identify with. In terms of outreach, and I know we have a short timeline here, recognize that, but the entities that are identified here, fine, but it seems like there ought to be a broader outreach here too, where I don't know if it's going to be a public meeting or what, but there ought to be an outreach also to the smaller businesses, and I'm not saying you do it 2 different meetings, do it all at once so you have broader buy-in. That's one thing, and comments, because not everybody's going to have the same perception, to generate more support or whatever. But the other part is, a lot of the businesses that are here, we certainly want to work with and have the support of the businesses, and the people who are going to be voting are the residents.
Sure.
So there has to be some outreach. I hope there would be some 2-prong outreach so that there could also be input garnered from the residents who are going to be voting on this.
Sure. And of course,
But they're not referenced here.
The polling is, our statistically reliable way to measure the opinions of the electorate at large, right? So that's one tool we have for input. When we're going through the infrastructure process, we published a lot of information on the city's website. We utilized the city's social media channels to engage those folks and invite feedback. We had a much broader outreach list that include neighborhood groups and a variety of different interests within the community. We can look at who the highest priority of those sort of community interests are that we would want to try to reach out to. We need to be realistic about the time available to do it.
Well, and then there's, in addition to the who, I realize there's also a question of the process, the outreach. And it can be kind of a two-dimensional conversation of whoever is speaking, say, to these different business interests. And then we have kind of resident community interests. Question would be whether it be constructive to actually have three parties there, the city, the business community, and resident representatives, so that the businesses hear from the residents and the residents hear from the businesses, and we get moved toward kind of a greater understanding of each other's interests and perspectives. And would that be valuable or not? I don't know. I just kind of want to put it out on the table. And then I do want to say that we have I have one speaker card so far from Judy Kleinberg. We've kind of done some preliminary conversation, and should we go ahead and hear from Judy and then loop back?
Yes.
Yeah. Judy, this is informal. If you'd like to go ahead and join us up here, welcome to.
No, I'm going to be pretty quick.
Okay.
Thank you for.
Come on, Judy.
You have to be in a microphone.
You either get to sit down or stand up at the mic. Judy.
Good exercise. Judy Kleinberg with the Palo Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for meeting to talk about this. I appreciate that. I wasn't personally notified, but I was told that you were having the meeting, so I'm here. I'm not going to speak to what you're talking about specifically because I didn't get a copy of what you're looking at. So I don't know what you're looking at, and I don't know what it says. So I will just say that the business community is very eager to collaborate with the city on anything that is related to the business community, of course, especially when there's taxing of business, and business is not voting, unless you happen to be a business owner living in Palo Alto. So taxation without representation is a touchy business, as you know. We obviously are very concerned about the business environment and the quality of life. Businesses don't want to do business in a community where it's not a healthy community. So we are of the same mind in that regard. We want this community to be vibrant and successful and healthy because that means the business climate is right. On the other hand, we're very interested in fairness. Business community wants to support what will work well and what will benefit the whole community, including the business community. So fairness is a big issue. And I hope you will not leave out the small businesses because they're the majority of the businesses in this community. And they have a very big stake in what you're talking about. So I can't talk to the particulars that you're talking about, but I thank you for including the business community in the outreach. And I would echo what Councilmember Niss said, which is that if you don't have time to include the business community in developing outreach, then maybe your time frame is wrong. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we're at 11:15 and time flies. We probably have, we had this scheduled to end at what time? Noon. Okay. So we do have this other question that Judy just raised, is to refine the outreach process on who would be included. Do we want to try to have some stakeholder representatives at a high level that would, as a follow-up to this meeting, would be part of that, and that I think would apply to both businesses and residents. And who do we get involved, and how do we make it be at least represented. You're not going to have something that's going to be able to reach everybody in this kind of time frame. And there, Judy also mentioned the issue of small businesses and large businesses. The highest number of businesses are small. The highest number, far and away, the greatest portion of employees are large. So large businesses will be the ones who would principally pay a head count tax. They're probably also the ones most or least concerned about the financial impact of it. So they pay the most and be the least concerned. Not saying unconcerned, but and so we just need to kind of put those things out there on the table and recognize those as kind of assumptions going in.
So what you
Yeah.
just said really resonates. I think there's got to be some working together up front, because I'm not sure I can guess exactly what businesses are thinking about this, but I'm not sure business overall is really going to object to some kind of income stream that would provide some relief from whether we call it congestion or however we may characterize it. I think that that's not going to be seen in a totally negative way. But I also want us to keep in mind, and I don't recall it, but the business tax that was voted on, am I right, in '09? Was that when it was done?
Yes.
And I know most of you were not on the council at that point, were you? Or were you?
I
That
was.
was.
You were. And learn from whatever happened then, and I think, as I recall, you said there was a lot of outreach done. Am I correct?
So let me briefly recap that as my understanding of it. It was a tax without a specific purpose. It was
Fund the
basically
general fund.
Fund the general fund. With the general fund was seeing long-term deficits, systemic deficits, and that the city at that time had really not done any reforms in benefits and pensions or kind of having the organization become leaner, any of those things. And under the prior city manager, he had said, well, we just need to have more income to go the course we've been going. And also, we out of that, within that deficit, we didn't have any funding plan for infrastructure, and we were underfunding infrastructure grossly. So that was kind of the setting for it. As far as
Was
the
it general
outreach,
tax or specific?
general.
General, yes.
So just 50%.
Yeah. As far as the outreach process, it was fairly protracted and fairly unproductive. Basically, the form of the tax changed a number of times in response to requests from the business community and different sectors of the business community. And each time it was changed in response to those requests, either the same or other sectors of the business community objected to the new form. And I found it to be really unproductive. And it's frankly, it's one of the issues that concerns me about this outreach. And I've spoken with members of the business community going forward, is that I don't want to participate in a repeat of that. If people we're engaging constructively in an outreach, and what we end up seeing is that outreach is just used to find any way and every way to beat down something that they were determined to beat down from the outset, I don't know how productive that is. So how do we get into a more productive scenario?
Just a quick add-on to that, because Greg and I were campaigning then, and I remember comments from the business community, because we didn't have Molly, it was a very poorly crafted ballot measure. So what I heard from the business community is like, because we're all selfish, whether individuals or businesses, like, what's in it for me? You know, what does this do for me? Why should I support this?
So that's the specific use part. But I'll just say that, for instance, there was one, we ended up having it was one as low as $50 per business. And we had one participant who I think was, she was a psychologist or whatever, and she spent months and months participating and bemoaning just the dire impact that $50 a year would have on her. It's like, really? So it wasn't the most rational of objections. It was visceral, but I think some of it was based upon we didn't have specific uses, and this goes into kind of the what's in it for you, and we hadn't done our own reforms as a city fiscally. And so I think those are two different settings. And the third setting is that we were in a downturn, and I think the general sentiment was, gee, we need any economic activity we can have, and we don't want to do anything would harm businesses. Right now, we're in kind of the other end of the spectrum where our own successes are having real impacts that we're trying to contend with. So those are the differences in the setting as I would see them.
So the other thing that I'm hearing from people just out there is like, and this was just a first blush through this, but people really do need to know like who would be taxed and who wouldn't. And having that clarity is really important.
One more thing, because what surprised me was the 74% for VTA, which people don't even at this point know a whole lot about, but feel very positively about it, which is a real puzzle to me because some of the last taxes didn't come to us and didn't make a lot of difference in North County. And yet when it came to looking at should we tax ourselves, that's dicey at 67, and got dicier as more was asked, and it was asked differently. So the question would be is, for you, how do we get up toward 68 or 69 or 70%?
Yeah.
What gets us there?
And what was
Can I
different?
chime in before you respond? Can I chime in with that? So I was not particularly thrilled with the question that was on the last polling around VTA. It was very focused on because it's a county tax, but what was in the polling was about what it's going to do for Palo Alto. So how a Palo Alto tax compares to the VTA tax is two things. One is the VTA tax.
Keep it all.
The VTA tax is spread over 30 years. So what do we get a year?
In 15 cities.
I'm sorry?
And 15 cities.
Yes. And so that's a really important distinction compared to what a local tax would bring to Palo Alto to make improvements. There's a great distinction, and that distinction was not made here. So if I had knew nothing and just was asked the question that's in this prior polling, I would have supported the VTA tax too. And I'm not trying to go counter to the VTA tax, but we need to discern the difference between the two to see where the support is.
Good point.
Yep. I think it's important to note that the descriptions of the measures that were utilized in your first round of polling were very high-level conceptual descriptions. They don't replicate the actual ballot question that people will encounter when they go into the voting booth. They don't contain the details of the
But
proposal.
people make up their mind before they go into the polling booth.
Some do. Fewer than you might guess in a ballot like we'll have this November with 30-plus issues on that ballot. I think one of the reasons why we saw a pretty positive gut level reaction from the voters to the VTA proposal is because their proposal hits on those, emotional high priority uses of the funds.
That too.
And so, the listing here that I provided of potential uses for the funds, this mirrors the priorities that your voters expressed when we asked them how would you like to see transportation dollars spent. Now, I agree with you. We have a challenge here that we need to wrestle with in that there are other funding sources that are already being dedicated to some of these uses, and the TDM or complicated policy strategic approaches to managing transportation problems don't resonate in the same way.
Not the same as a pothole.
Yeah, because I know what a pothole is, right? I understand that problem and I understand why it needs to be addressed, but TDM takes me a while to get my head around it.
The reason it doesn't resonate is the residents of Palo Alto believe that they're going to drive for the most part. They believe that the businesses should do other things, right? But they don't really understand what that means. And we have to make that, get them get excited about it. Now, a lot of them like to bike, right? So they understand biking. That's why biking always does well. It polls well because they bike.
Or they like others to bike.
They like others to bike.
What it is, it's sort of like Caltrain. We all love Caltrain, not because we take it every day, but because once a year we take it to Giants game and suddenly we're Caltrain users and we value Caltrain because that one day a year. Most people bike once in a while, and so they relate to biking even if they don't bike regularly.
So I did also want to touch on what Karen said. I would be very concerned in anything and would not support anything that I thought might knock the VTA poll down. And some making those distinctions to make us look better could very well do that. And I'm not interested in doing that.
Again, it's not an us versus them, it's to make a case for
But
why
it could be
both
seen
not
as it
one.
could be seen as an us versus them. We have to be very
But that's what
careful.
polling will tell us.
Right, but we have to be very careful about that. We have to make sure we don't do that. So, and just one minor thing. On this fact sheet, I'd much rather we say expand local shuttle service as opposed to local shuttle bus service, because shuttle service may include, it may be a lot cheaper to basically get a small Uber out there for people.
Who knows, right.
Right, and I don't want to lock it in and people say later, you promised bus service.
Right.
Okay.
So I wanted to also ask how we move forward and wrap this up. What are the key decisions we need to make? And let's move to vote on them and, start getting
So-
them hashed out.
We have the general themes that we want to take out to the stakeholder groups, and we're doing some refinement there. And then we have the question of who we should focus on. And why don't we switch gears a moment and spend a little time on the who?
Yeah.
So I'll just say, if we look at, even on the small business side, we have the downtown business improvement district, right? Which is heavily emphasized here, but there's a couple issues I have there. One is that many of these companies are also members of the chamber. Second, that the proportion of small businesses in the community that are represented by the Downtown Business Improvement District is actually moderately small. And we tend to, because they're present and we've funded this entity, I think we tend to attribute that to being a greater proportion of citywide small businesses than they actually represent. Third, in our funding, and this is something that we'll probably be talking about a little more when their contract renewal comes up. It is specifically not to be an organization that is doing lobbying on political purposes. And unfortunately, we've been seeing them do that quite a lot. And so I'm much more interested in having the Chamber of Commerce be able to help identify representatives of different sectors of the small business community from different areas of the community, recognizing that a lot of the smallest businesses aren't part of the chamber necessarily. And we also have our business registry, and maybe we'll just look at different ways to try to figure out how do we connect with representatives of small businesses that are in different sectors, not only retail. We have all the business services and medical and all those different types of businesses that would be here in different geographic areas of the community. So that's something that I would recommend.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And the chamber's great. It does tend to be more focused downtown, so I'm glad you said different areas of town. And also, if there's a way to, and you will know better, way to utilize, I was going to bring this up, same thing, the business register as a way to reach out to some of the smaller businesses to get that kind of participation, get their input.
So I guess the question is, we were originally thinking of exempting businesses with less than 10 employees or something like that.
Good point.
So, we have limited time. If we are going to stick with at least 10 less, I don't see any reason to reach out to people with less than 10 employees other than to say, we're going to exempt you, so don't get all up in arms about it.
Yeah, it might be good to have a few and measure that response and say,
Yeah.
okay, so if you're exempted, are you
Fair
an
enough.
ally on this?
No, fair enough, right.
Yeah, but your point is well taken that we don't. They're not going to have a financial. It won't have a negative financial impact on them
It
Well, but
should
that's-
have,
Positive.
will have a positive
It should have a
impact
positive
on them.
impact
But
on
shouldn't
them.
They should be all for it.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we hear from them, though, what
That's
their
what I was
issues
saying.
are to help inform the questions and the polling?
That's what I was
going
saying.
forward?
Include them for the purpose
Yeah.
of discussion,
Yeah.
but distinguish that and make sure we're clear that they're not candidates. They're candidates to be exempted.
Right.
Do-
I mean,
do we have
residents aren't
some-
going to be
some
taxed either,
numbers
but
on
we
this?
want their
We have
input.
the 10 largest employers, and then mine stops at sampling of medium-sized businesses. I don't know who
We
put
just
this.
didn't have time to
Yeah.
start identifying.
You only got that far.
Yeah, in the business registry, sort of, the vast majority is in that,
11 to
you
50.
know, the 11 to 50 category.
As far as numbers.
Yeah,
So
The vast majority of
So we were thinking
businesses
that-
are in that number,
Right.
so that's,
right.
One of the outreach targets would be a sampling of those businesses in the 11 to 50 category based on the business registry, and certainly we can
and
consult with the chamber
I couldn't
for
begin to
identifying
guess
some
how many
targets.
medium-sized businesses there are in Palo Alto, so that would be
11 to
really
50,
helpful.
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
sorry.
we just
So
sort of
Stanford
Yeah.
University within the city of Palo Alto at 11,000.
No, it's probably the.
It must be the whole thing.
Laura?
Paul, Chris, Chief Financial Officer. No, that's a combination. So it's
Yeah.
been a difficult task for us to split between the unincorporated and the city limit. So we typically put a notation that it's combined figures.
And it's the employees.
Yeah, I mean, so principally, you know, they do a lot of back-end outsourcing now in the community that's not on campus. And so that makes them employers in Palo Alto City. So I don't know, do we take it as an 11,000? Is Lucille Packard's not within that, but is the Med Center within that
See,
11,000?
it's the Med Center is also called out separately as 5,800.
Yeah, but I don't get, but I don't know what to do with this 11,000 number.
It's just the list of the 10 largest.
So we're
employers,
probably
so
not
it
gonna
doesn't
count that in all the
be-
money we're gonna.
Yeah, but are we double counting there? I mean, it does, we don't have 11,000
It
Stanford
says City of Palo Alto, and I don't
employees.
think that's the case,
Yeah.
yeah.
And, you know, we can change it. I think the point that, the reason we wanted to illustrate it is because that traffic comes through somewhere, either through a train, a bus, or a car.
Yeah, but that's not helpful. What's helpful is how much money are we gonna collect?
Yeah,
Right, I
that's
mean,
not
if we're
what
not
this,
con-
this
if
is
we're
an
not
outreach
con-
list, not a, not
All
meant
we
to-
did is pull off the list of the 10 largest employers off an existing.
So I would
list.
also
We're not
say-
saying this is.
Yeah, but I'm saying that Stanford University under this is representative of over 10% of the total, and I think that there's something goofy on that number.
We'll check the net piece,
Okay. But what part of why I was looking at that is, if we put these into groupings, we could have some major groupings that would, if you think of the two hospitals, the Stanford Shopping Center, which is thousands of employees probably, and then Stanford Research Park, which is 26,000 employees according to them, I think more we thought. Out of what's listed here, I don't know Colubris Networks. Is that a renaming of someone else? But HP and VMware and SAP are listed, and so they collectively total about 9,000 out of the 26 or 28,000 in the research park. So you pretty quickly come up with, and this is a value to our registry, you say, okay, what portion of the employers who would be taxed are we able to capture through these major employers, and then what portion remain through other employers that are 11 to 50 or 50 above, but are not part of those big categories.
Also, I mean, I hate to say it, but, you know, Palantir probably should be clearly on here. And the other thing, I mean, I don't know, what, 1,000 employees?
They are on here, under
Where?
GMA Board of Directors. Go to the bottom.
Okay.
They're there, but not.
But they're not under the largest.
They're clearly the largest employer downtown, aren't they? I guess City is, right?
Amazon.
No, the city's smaller than
Amazon's bigger downtown?
Palantir.
Downtown.
That's what CHOP says.
That's what Palantir says.
How many?
I can't tell you. I'm just saying that Palantir told us that Amazon is the largest employer downtown.
Interesting.
Okay. Well, that's really helpful. So I mean, I think having that kind of right data
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
really helpful. The other thing is, I think when we count the Stanford Hospital, where is here? Stanford, the University Medical Center Hospital. Are we counting their Redwood City employees too? Because I know they have a ton in Redwood City, and you know, so we might want to just make sure these are actually the people in Palo Alto.
I don't,
Well,
I,
but let
I
me-
don't
let
think
me-
that they're Redwood City. I think what this is the entire number when you're adding everything up. And that's what I think is erroneous, because, as Pat mentioned, there's some duplicate here. There must be.
And can I just say something? I think we need to get realistic here. We have 2 weeks on the schedule to do outreach, from May 23rd to June
Right.
10th. And we have a Memorial Day holiday weekend in there. So one question is, to what extent are we doing targeted outreach versus open-ended stuff? And I'm assuming for the most part, we're not going to just sort of say, hey, we're going to have some meetings and everybody come. We're really going to have to work through channels, the chamber and others, to sort of say, we'd like to talk to you. And for the most part, what you want to do is at least be able to say, well, we tried to, over a 2-week period, to get at least an initial representative sample. So we talk to these different places. We can't get everything. And some people will even ask, they say, geez, I'd like to do it, but I just can't do it during this time frame. We could collect some information.
So let's see quickly if we can get to consensus on a few things, because we have now 20 minutes remaining.
And I've got to leave a bit early.
Okay, so let me offer up some things and see whether people agree or disagree.
And this is just focused on interest groups, right? Your stakeholders?
Right now.
Yeah, okay.
So that we want to have broad representation from businesses that would prospectively be taxed, which would include the large employers, as well as representation of employers in the 11 to 50 or
Yes.
11 to 100 range.
Agree so far?
Okay. That we want that to be balanced geographically and not overemphasize the downtown, but proportionately represent the downtown.
So far, so good.
So I don't know about proportionally. I'd like the downtown to be represented, and the research park's important too, but on proportional, they so outweigh them in terms of numbers that I don't think proportional may work. I'm a
So,
little concerned about
yeah,
that.
so let me think about how to better describe proportionate. Within business size categories, proportionately,
Fair.
not proportionate to the number of employees necessarily.
What does that mean?
That means that out of businesses, say in the 11 to 50, we'll have them represented proportionate to different geographic areas throughout the city. We won't have, if downtown had a quarter of the businesses with 11 to 50 employees, we won't have downtown having 3/4 of the stakeholders in the 11 to 50 employee category.
But let's not get too granular here.
I'm just
either,
trying to
because as
explain what I
Jim
meant
said,
there.
We're trying to.
So, and that's
we're
what I
trying to
just
get
was
to the-
doing. I just provided a clarification to a question. Okay. That we also want to have a stakeholder outreach to residents, and that and we want to have a focused, called pre-meeting, of representatives of each of these groups within, say, the next week, to help us frame the discussion that we'd have with a broader set of stakeholder groups.
Okay, that's all.
Support
good.
that.
Okay? Got too
Can
much
you
agreement?
repeat that just to make sure I understand? You
Yeah, so
David
this is
probably
sampling
can
of
capture.
residents specifically?
No.
No.
On all. It would be, so that what we do is, on a process standpoint, we would quickly have a small group and to get their input on the sorts of questions, the follow-up to what we have here today, have them help inform the fuller outreach process.
And then we'd reconvene with that information, come up with new questions. Is that the plan?
Well, that's a good question. Do we need to reconvene, or do we allow staff to then take that and go into those first outreach
Let's let
meetings?
staff
If
do
we could,
that.
I was thinking it'd be great if we could meet again and just have, no longer than a 1-hour meeting to just hear what was learned.
Maybe if it's to hear what staff has to say, but I'm hoping by that point, we're the time frame is so tight on this, as Jim has said, that I think we're going to have to leave a lot of this after our suggestions today up to staff, whomever that might be.
Well, but
Carry through on this.
I'm sorry. Oh, so Greg just Greg is just clarifying that he was referring to the polling question.
Right, that after we get all this
Oh,
information, we then come back.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's yes.
What I actually meant
right.
was we let staff run with this.
Oh, gotcha.
We let them
Okay.
do it. Was
Good.
the opposite of good.
That is much better.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, we have another meeting of this committee in the timeline to review the feedback from the outreach process and how that would turn into polling questions. Yeah.
Great.
But help me again, a little more detail. We're going to have some sort of a very small stakeholder group identified who would help, who we sort of initially sort of talk about this and then get some of their suggestions about. I'm trying to understand.
Sort of a focus group, so we have in mind
Yeah.
to road test the messaging and the questions to make
And
sure we're
have
going to get the right
feedback.
feedback.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And engage the business community a little.
So they would be somewhat of our maybe ambassadors or network to their broader communities.
Yeah. And then I have a final question, really. I didn't put this out there as for the consensus because I'm kind of torn on my own, is when we do have the outreach, do we try to have both businesses and residents together in one or more of the outreach meetings?
Well, do
You
you
got
envision
time to
having
do all
this,
that.
the initial small group having a resident representation there? So initially that would, well, maybe that might be a question.
Maybe that's a question we let them struggle
You
with.
guys should figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It may or may not be a good idea.
Right, and that's why I'm saying I'm
It may or
torn.
may not be logistically possible given the
Yeah.
time frame. So.
Yeah.
You all do this for a living.
We're going to leave it up to the
We're the
experts.
advice. We're the advice group.
So I think we have to accept the fact that we're really going to have to make some compromises because of the tightness of the schedule. Because, you know, in outreach, I mean, in an outreach initiative like this, on the one hand, you would just have a more open-ended listening, let's hear your problem definition. What are the kind of solutions you're thinking of before you're even talking about solutions and testing them? And then another one, we're informing people. Here's our thinking about. So we're already sort of saying we've reached some conclusions there. There's some big problems. Here are some gaps. We're thinking about stuff, and then we're testing things. And I think we're clearly saying we have to gravitate towards the latter. I mean, we don't have time right now for just some. And so we need to acknowledge that it will make it easy for somebody to say, well, you guys had already made some decisions, you just tested it, you didn't really involve me, all that sort of stuff. And we just need to acknowledge, well, it's pretty clear, it's enough of a problem, that if we put it on the ballot, there'll be plenty of time for those things to start to happen for people to deal with stuff. But I just did want to be clear, we're much more focused on trying to frame and test some possible message themes to help inform your next decision more than an onboarding process with the public, because we can't say it's going to be broad enough to be doing that.
With what I put out there, do we have consensus on the who and the how?
Yes.
And then we still have to see whether we had an earlier discussion on the what we want, what the content should be of that, or at least what we would suggest. But people are, it looks like you need to get to. And Liz needs to go. So did we cover the what well enough? We have one late speaker, Herb Borak, who wants to also speak. But did we cover well enough the content part, our feedback on them? We did on the problem definition. We touched on the solution, but we really didn't get to go into as much depth as we might have liked to have on that. And then we're informed by key questions.
I'm fine with having another meeting to talk about that in more depth after thinking about it. But
Yeah.
on the whole, I'm sort of fine with that. I had some the nitpicky thing on the bus thing, and we talked a little bit about that other stuff. And I mentioned my concerns with their alternate funding sources for a lot of this stuff.
So here's one other thing that we could do as a follow-up, is that we can have a subcommittee of this group be able to just discuss this more with staff so that we don't have to convene a whole
And I
committee.
actually,
I'm happy to do that.
that's a good idea.
So in addition to,
Say that again?
A subcommittee of this meeting, do a follow-up before we do the outreach, so that we don't have to convene the whole committee. I don't think we're gonna have time to do so on these. A little more of what we want to toss out to the outreach group on the proposed solution and key questions.
Well,
So
it's just a 24-hour notice we have to give, and I don't know why we couldn't have a meeting of the committee.
well, I can tell you, well, really, come on, guys. I mean, we are fixing the airplane while we're flying it here over the next 2 weeks. And I mean, I think a more important question would be, do you all in any way want to be involved in the outreach? Because we're going to have to be saying,
Good
here's a
question.
problem, here's an issue, we want
I'm
to hear
happy
what
to
you're
go to
saying.
outreach
And in that
meetings.
sense,
Likewise.
that helps you guys even on the fly modify and reframe. We may say
Okay.
something wrong and you say, no, here's what we
Glad to.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
know?
I think all of us want
And
to
I
do
think
that.
that would help.
I'm here until the end of June.
I'm
One
around
of you
too.
is gone. Isn't somebody gone? in this?
I'm gone 3 days, but it doesn't, well,
Well, the key thing right now is between now and June 10th on the schedule, so that's really the issue for you guys.
So I'm
Because-
around.
yeah.
You just asked me, and I'll come to these outreach meetings.
I'm gone
I'm-
3
I
I'm
like-
gone 3 days the
Okay,
week of
yeah,
May
and we'll see.
23.
Maybe one or two of you might be able to go
And
to some. And
And I assume if we have are we going to set up a subcommittee, or are we just going to send staff further thoughts we might have on this?
We can do that.
So can
Yeah.
I put one thing out, though, that adds on to what you said earlier, Pat? It's, I think part of the framing for this is, you mentioned infrastructure. And I think it is important,
Thanks.
I think it is important to remind the community that we've done a good job on infrastructure. And also recognize that we know that transportation issue is a regional one, but we need to do our part.
So we need, wait a minute, we have Herb.
Do you want us to wait for her?
I think so.
Yes,
So
we need-
Herb, why don't you go ahead and speak while we still have a quorum?
Come on, Herbie, hold no problem. Just kidding.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak, and thank you, Vice Mayor Sharp, for staying to keep a quorum. On the outreach, I think one thing that you might want to include is what I think you should have in the poll, and that is to identify all of the tax measures that might be on the ballot. That when you did the first poll, you only looked at the BART tax and how this tax might affect that. But there also may be a county tax on housing. There's the Bayside Wetlands, which is the entire Bay Area. And there's also the reauthorization of the state taxes that the governor had. And for both in the poll, but also for the outreach, you need to explain to those people that it's not just going to be this measure, and it's not going to just be 2 measures on the ballot. And the other thing, in terms of a request, I've always believed that a general tax is better, and it's based upon the number of employees that are reported monthly when a tax withholding is filed, since that's something that I believe it can be audited, but it's not available to the public generally. And it should be for everybody. So if someone has 1 employee, that's a tax. If someone has 1,000, that's a tax, and it's done by location. So you get the actual number of Stanford in the research park as opposed to Stanford on the campus. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I move to adjourn.
Meeting's adjourned. Okay.